Collect all the gems to break the spell. Awaken the creator of the new world. Professor! Green's been here. He's got a gem! Uh-oh. That means our only hope is... title drop! We have to stop him! Your journey ends here! Where is he? That light? It's too late! No! The Earth, under one person's power. If you're thinking that plot summary made no sense, congrats, that's because they cut a lot of the story out of the US version. Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Gunstar Heroes. One of my favorite Sega Genesis games. We're getting into it. We're going to be playing on hard mode because I just find it to be the most fun experience for me, barring one particular fight. And we're going to be playing on one player because I don't have Scott with me. I did eventually try to record this with him once, but that ended up failing. Starting off, you get some options of what to choose. You can choose free or fixed shot. These determine whether or not you can fire and walk at the same time. Free shot's closer to Contra, which is what I prefer. Fixed shot I've done good with over the years as well. And then you get to choose your starting weapon. From left to right, they are Force, Lightning, Chaser, and Fire. They all are pretty useful, and I'm going to be going with Chaser for the most part throughout this LP, though. Which stage do we choose? We got 4 stages to choose from, and we need to complete them all to beat the game. The Ancient Ruins. Pink's mining machine dug up a gem. Empire armies attacking the natives. Save them. Now I say I chose Chaser, but I chose Fire there. That's because we're now in a completely different recording session. So Chaser, as its name implies, the green one, is a homing attack. Force is your standard machine gun right out of Contra. Lightning is a small beam of electricity that kind of flies out from you. And then Fire is a small, short-distance flamethrower. But you may have noticed I tackled an enemy and it dropped another weapon. You dual-class your weapons in this game, and each combination gives you a different effect. For instance, Lightning Chaser, which is my favorite weapon, barring one particular one, is an extreme homing attack that is active as long as you're holding the attack button down. This is why I prefer to use Free Shot, because I can just focus on avoiding attacks instead of actively attacking. We'll see most of the combos, I think, as we progress throughout the game, but to keep in mind that there is a combo for every single combo of items, including one of the same thing. For instance, Double Chaser, you fire out stars that home in very hard. Double Force, you fire out even a higher frequency. Double Fire, I think, is an explosion, or is that Fire Force? I can't quite remember. Every weapon has a use for someone. It all depends on how you prefer to play games like this, because this is definitely one of the more out there Contra-likes run and guns. But the other major technique you want to keep in mind is your physical attacks. Not only can your Gunstar hero of choice throw enemies by getting close to them and holding the, I think it's the A button by default, not with my customized controls, but you can also do a mid-air attack by pressing the jump button again. And that's pretty important because you get a pretty decent amount of invincibility frames while doing that, and you can just clip through enemies, basically. You can also do wall jumps, but that's only really important in like 2 screens of the game, period. My main gameplay technique when it comes to playing this, get something with Chaser, usually Lightning Chaser, sometimes Chaser, and then just body tackle everything to death and hopefully just get around being hit. Thankfully, the game's good about giving you checkpoints overall as well. is giving you just health pickups, either from certain mini-bosses like the Phantom we took out a few moments ago, or from the birds. And whenever you see a bird that drops a weapon, you can attack it again, usually with a body tackle, to make it drop a second version of the item. No, I think it's random, depending on the frame, really, what a bird will drop. For now, though, it's time for our first boss fight of many. This is Bravo Man. Whenever a boss is about to spawn, they show you its name, as well as the general idea of what its attacks are going to be, like Spinning Driver and Dragon Punch. This thing likes to do a giant dancing kick and a giant punch. And man, meet the equivalent to Mode 7 on the Sega Genesis. Bravo Man's not too bad, though, because he's pretty slow. I do believe if you let him stick around long enough, you can regenerate all of his health, but it takes a lot to be able to do that, honestly. I think I've only seen him do that maybe twice, if even. Gunstar is very Contra-like at the end of the day, but it likes to do a lot more of its boss fights than Contra, whereas Contra will maybe have one boss per stage, barring like a final stage, and really all of Contra 3. Gunstar likes to have 2 to 4 per stage, especially one particular stage we might be doing later this very part. This is a section I recommend having some variant of Chaser ready for, because if you stick around about where I am and just fire upwards, most of the enemies will be taken out before they get a chance to do anything. And I should note, if you're ever stuck with a beam that's unfortunate for what you're doing at that particular point in time, you're not entirely out of luck, as you can press, I think by default it's the C button, to alternate your beams. You'll start with the combo, then you can go to the beam on the left and the beam on the right. So at any point in time, you can technically have upwards of 3 different attacks ready for boss fights and enemies. It's just a matter of whether or not you got good ones, or if it's comfortable for your playstyle at the least. Vitality is pretty self-explanatory, that is your HP, but every single enemy attack basically has a different attack value, so you'd be a little careful. For now, though, it's time for the end of Stage 1 boss fight, Pinky Rotor, with Hitman Shot and Iron Knuckle. You guys like crab mechs? Because this is a crab mech. The problem with this fight is it's relatively hard to attack the main body here without getting hit yourself, unless you position yourself really weirdly here with the Hitman Shot and just start sliding by pressing down the jump button to do some damage. Eventually, the walker does walk left and right. I want to say whenever boss fights do that stuff, it's usually dependent on an HP trigger. And at that point, you can get underneath it to fire into it, but you're going to want to make sure you duck, because otherwise I think you get hit by the jump itself. And then you're going to want to fire upwards and hope you can take out any of the mines it's firing up before they make contact with you. Most of the boss fights in this game, they have a lot of HP visually, but the amount of damage that you do depends entirely on your weapon combo strength. For the most part, though, they go down pretty quickly. When also seen that, I should probably put a warning in the front of this video, because this entire game is extraordinarily flashy. Not quite on the level with, like, Pulse Man, but pretty high up there. With that said, our first gem is collected, as is our first stage complete, so now we can move on to the next one of our choice. I prefer to go after the flying battleship. Captain Orange is about to leave with a gem. What are these gems? We'll talk about them later on. The flying battleship is just leaving. Follow it. Something I do like about Gunstar Heroes overall is it's not a very long game, no matter what you do, but I like that they actually make the stages vary up in what they are. Because the first stage, I can never remember the name of the actual stage, so I just called them based off the boss. Pink's stage is a pretty straightforward run and gun. Whereas this one's semi-auto-scroller, and because of it is also a notably shorter stage, every stage here genuinely feels like it's something completely different, in a way that doesn't feel like it makes the main mechanics annoying, I guess, because that's a feel where games sometimes get a little weird with variety. Is that sometimes they do variety just to distract from their main mechanics being bad, or they don't let something get developed enough. This all exists to make the run and gun mechanics feel more entertaining in the long run. It's not... It adds to it, is what I'm saying here. It doesn't try to distract or distract. Something else worth noting, by the way, you might notice right now my health is at 117. At the start of the game, your health maxes out at 100, but for every single stage you beat, you gain an extra 20 health. And that continues into the second to last stage, even if memory serves. And additionally, on top of that, just because your starting health is at a certain number, doesn't mean that's your max health. If you don't get hit, or if you manage to get a lot of health items spawned from enemies or otherwise, you can overheal past your supposed max. And just keep on piling on the health until you are basically not unkillable because enemies do a lot of damage, all things considered, in this game. But it definitely gives you a bumper. I think the highest I've gotten just from not getting hit is probably by the end of stage 2, or at least my second stage, probably about 160, somewhere abouts. I don't know what hit me there. But here we go. Now the auto-scroller is done, so it's time for the stage to actually be a stage, but for the most part it's not a very long stage, and again, the Phantom there is probably one of the most annoying things, and the Phantoms are weird in that they're basically just the standard foot soldier, but with invisible health bars. The biggest thing is that they are an instance of a boss fight that also has invincibility frames. The way this game tends to do things is you'll damage an enemy until they get knocked back, and then they're invincible for a little bit. That's especially the case with Phantoms in a lot of boss fights. So you can't just spam fire at them. And things like Lightning Chaser here are especially guilty of doing that. Time for the swapping reg, which I believe is meant to be swapping leg with its leg Vulcan. It's a giant pair of legs that bounce up and down. You just need to get between. But as you can see, there's a lot of fights where Lightning Chaser just kind of means you can stand still out of their harm's way and take care of over half their health, and then you can just do the belly flop through them and do even more damage. Gunstar is not an easy game, I'd say even on its easiest difficulty, but it's definitely, for a run and gun like Contra, a very approachable one, even despite the chaos the stages have. Between the pickup system, meaning basically everyone has a playstyle that could probably fit their comfort level, and the checkpoints and overall, just everything feels very good in this game. With that said, time for a boss fight of sorts. This is time for our first fight against Smash Daisaku, who looks a lot like M. Bison, and I didn't realize he had a beard until I looked at concept art. He flies all over the place and drops mines. If you have something that you need to aim with, this could be a little annoying. Lightning Chaser, not so much, although this fight does highlight one of the problems with Lightning Chaser. When an enemy throws out bombs or projectiles, sometimes they are counted as a separate entity that Lightning Chaser can home in on, and you kind of just need to stop firing for a second and then hope you're close enough to the enemy that you'll just lock back onto the main enemy. With that said, time for Orange. Orange is a pretty hectic fight because we're above a bottomless pit. That's not an instant death bottomless pit, this one, I believe. You just fly back up and losing like 20 health. The big thing is he's melee focused. He can get onto the rotor and try to pile drive you. He can do some sort of energy fart on you and throw you off outright. Throwing is our best strategy here, though, which is getting right in front of an enemy and pressing the A button, I think it is by default, and then a direction to sort of throw them. It's sort of like Turtles in Time throwing. But you do significantly less damage if you throw him off. You only do about 30 to 40 damage by throwing him off the plane. You want to throw him onto the wing of the plane, which does about 450 damage. That boss fight alone, especially if you're on hard mode, is why I would recommend coming up to the stage second or third. I will say, no matter what, you should tackle the stage that's second in the stage select last, just for endurance reasons. Reasons, not regions. With that, time for easily the most out there of the main 4 stages. Black, the lord of the strange fortress, has a gem. Cool. What else? Black has built a silly dice maze. Go! Okay, so this stage starts off pretty standard. It's just a small enemy rush, all things considered. In terms of length, at least, there's a lot of enemies, even in the small enemy rushes in this. But the main mechanic of this stage is the dice maze the professor just mentioned. And it's also where this stage, if you're a speedrunner, can be a bit of a pain in the ass, because this stage is incredibly random. Once we get past this section, we're going to be in one room with a sort of like a board game board behind us, and a dice will spawn that you then have to throw to roll. And then it'll roll, I think, somewhere between 1 and 3. I don't think you can get higher than that. Your player will then move that amount of spaces, and your goal is to get to the end alive, really. The thing is, every single space is some sort of event. For the most part, they are boss fights. But some are also like little obstacle mazes, and a couple are restore points that give you like 3 of the weapon types and a heart. So, yeah, if you want to technically fight every boss in this game, you're gonna have to do a lot of grinding at this stage, probably. But because of that, this stage can either be a complete pain in the ass, or not much of note because of what you get. The real cruel thing is when you get to the very end, and then you get the way back, which sends you back to the start. There are some notable fights in here. A very famous one that I unfortunately don't get is against Melon Bread, which is this creepy-looking face made up of 2 giant round eyes and a mouth made out of, like, triangle particles. That fight's actually very prevalent if you're an Undertale fan, because Lemon Bread is based off of that thing. This is also a stage that gets a little hectic in multiplayer, because this is the type of game that doesn't like Contra, where both players are there at once. And that means clutters all over the place, and I believe they increase either boss HP or the amount of enemies they spawn. And for stages like this where you don't have a lot of resources, it gets just incredibly visually complicated. This is one of the obstacle courses of note. Whenever you press, I think it's the C button with my current controller configuration, you swap which color is opened on the doors and you get to the goal. What's really good about some of these is that I think you get relatively free clears out of it. The big problem is whether or not you can do good wall jumps, or the ball can just take me up to the goal. That works too. There's a surprising amount of little score attack things in this game, and there's one in particular we're going to be talking about in the second to last stage that's incredibly lengthy, but has some interesting lore to it, sort of. My own history with Gunstar's a little sparse, though, compared to some other games I've done on the channel. This was one I found out about, I think, during the era of YouTube, and I just got really into playing because I liked playing games like Contra to begin with, also High Street Fighter reference. And again, like I mentioned earlier, I attempted to do an LP of this with my buddy Scott back when we were in college. But we got to, and I shit you not, the second to last stage, and that was back when I still recorded using Camtasia Studio's built-in screen recorder, which was good for quality, at least good enough, but it could balloon file sizes, and I ran out of hard drive space. And when I clicked save file as is, it deleted it all the same for some reason. Which that sucked, but oh well. Also, something I'm trying to do here a little bit is showcase some of the other weapon combos, since I tend to stick with Lightning Chaser so much. A really good one that you saw for a second there is this one, actually, Force Fire, which I think has the highest individual damage output per blast, because the explosion really hurts the enemies. But the other one there, I think, was Lightning Fire? The one that looked like the lightning beam, but it's really close. It looked almost like a lightsaber. As that, I think, has the highest overall DPS, but you have to be really close to an enemy to actually use it. I'd say on your average playthrough of Gunstar, you're probably going to see at least half of the weapon combos, as long as you're experimenting around, but if you find one that's really good for you, just really stick with it. This mini-boss is a little stressful. You have to fire downwards at it, which is much easier if you have fixed shot on rather than free shot. There are some fights where fixed or free is easier than the other. And then you just have to keep in mind where the beam's going to be bouncing based off the order the orbs flash in. Sometimes this can get really fast and be really stressful, especially in multiplayer. But ultimately, your experience in this level is entirely depending on your luck. You could get through it in as few as, I think, 6 dice rolls is what you need to get to the end if you just hit a 3 every time. With unoptimal luck, you're probably getting upwards of 30 rolls if you just somehow get a 1 every time. The best thing about it is that thankfully when you've done a fight, you don't need to redo it in the case you get hit with that the way back space, because that fight is marked as clear. Probably one of the most annoying ones in here, though, is the one panel that's marked as a gun with a no sign on it. That is, I want to say it's a fight against either a phantom of some sort or like a little soldier guy. And you don't have any weapons. You need to rely on the belly flop, the slide, and throwing entirely. And you know what? That's probably a fight that's a little easier in multiplayer because you have probably someone who can act as a body shield. Another mechanic I should probably mention about multiplayer, if memory serves at least. If one player dies, they're out. But they can come back at the cost of half the health of the other player, I want to say. Or it's like 50 health. It's been a while since I attempted that recording, so I don't exactly remember at this point. I am kind of surprised, though, thinking about it. I think this is the first time I'm tackling a game by Treasure on the channel, and they've put down a lot of this type of, like, high-octane action or shooter game over the years. Alien Soldier's another big one of them. Radiant Silvergun, Ikaruga. Wario World's probably one of the weirder games in their credits, but they're not a developer I play a lot of the games of, but whenever I do, I know I'm in for a probably brutal time, but a fun time. Bangai-O is another one I'm a big fan of, even though the later parts of that game series get a bit too intense, probably for their own good. But now we're on to the boss fight. So, Black's a little bit of an odd fight. He's going to be coming in on his own little walker, just like how Pink did, but you might notice around the ceiling and walls are 4 colored panels. Blue, green, yellow, red, in that order, just depending on the direction. He's going to roll a dice and walk that many spaces, and he's going to stop on a colored space and do that attack. For instance, I believe his first attack is yellow on this playthrough, which is lasers that take about the middle plus shape of the arena. When he stops on green, it's a bouncy ball that bounces across the room, generally about the green panels. When it's blue, it's 4 bombs that explode in the 4 corners of the room, doing a pretty decently sized explosion. And when it is red, it is a fire trail that will go from one red panel to the next, kind of hugging the outside wall. Despite how hectic his stage can be, Black isn't honestly that hard of a fight. The biggest thing he has going for him from memory is I want to say he might have the highest health total out of all the starting 4 bosses at least. Sort of. One of those is sort of a different scenario to begin with, and we'll get into that next part. But that high health is exactly why I brought in Force Fire in this case, because like mentioned, it's a very high damage weapon, and a part of it I forgot to mention is that the explosion itself does damage, but the radiating fire from the explosion continues to do damage, so it's sort of got a splash damage effect. And there we go, that's our 3rd stage down. Now give me that gem, dude. Oh, this feels familiar. Thank you! No, you almost got me, you little stinker. You're not Dr. Wily. Now give me the real one! Give it to me! Give it to me! Is that enough? Thank you. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to go after our 4th of the main 4 stages before starting off the endgame gauntlet of sorts. See you guys then.